Kāti ruruku te rangi tēnei, te rangi kau ka mau ko te ruruku I ruku te ai ko rangi nui e tūnei. Tēnei te ruruku kau ka mau ko te ruruku o tēnei wenua I ruku te kuti kuti peka peka ko papatua nuku e tako tōnei. Tēnei te ruruku kau ka tā maua ki ngā tauira, he ruruku ki tēnei matu aiwi, e rongo e wakari a ki kirunga kia tīna aumie ui e tā ki e. A tēnei taku manu te korimako te kō nei. Ka kō kiuta, ka kō kitai. He manu tui, te tuiti, huia tuia mai e te iwi ki tēnei pai kōrero o te Kohu Ka Rewa. Hoi te anō rā nei rā māua ko Hemi, kua ngaro. Ia māua tō māua nei tuakana te Poihi. Hoi te anō rā kei konei māua. He wakakanohi ngā kōrero mo tēnei pō. O reire mihi ana ki o tātou mate, rātou kua riro I te wāiti nei, ko rātou ki a rātou ana, ko tātou henei ngā kanohi o rau rātou. E kaue tonu nei, kōkiri tonu nei ngā mahi. No reire te iwi, hara mai rarau ki tō tātou pai kōrero I tēnei pō, no reira tēnā rā tātou. Ka tuku nā tūrā ki a koe I.
Ai te iwi tēnā koutou, tika ana te kōrero ia Hemi I te pōnei, ko ngaro tō tātou paupau, ia te Poihi, ka noho rā ko ia hei pau ia tātou, hei pau here o tātou kōrero I roto I ngā pō, o te anō, I arohana ka re tāia I te pōnei, hoi anō. Ko te kaupapa tonu tēnei e hare tonu nei. Ko ia tēnei ko māua ko Hemi, Ngāti mutunga kai roto I tō tātou ware I te pōnei, hei kawe I e te hei kupu kōrero, I e te hei maramara kōrero, mā koutou anō e tātari, mā koutou anō e ruku, kia kite ai e māramatanga, he hohunutanga mō koutou I roto I ngā tau. Hui anō e mihi ana kia koutou e te iwi, ngā mate o te wā, e mihi ana kia koutou, o koutou I roto taipo ko tēnei. Ia tātou, koe no o tunu nei te pō, kai roto I te ao mārama I tēnei wiki. Hui anō, te anō rā te mihi kia koutou, kai aku tuakana, kai aku taina, aku matua waine, kuia tau eke, e mihi ana kia koutou te iwi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā katoa mai rā tātou I tēnei pō.
Kia ora everyone, so welcome back. We're filling in for Te Poihi in terms of introducing our kaupapa kōrero I te pōnei, but again, we acknowledge Te Korimako and we acknowledge all of you that have made time this evening to join us. And as Hemi has stated, we thought to continue the theme of last week when we talked about the pāuatanga o pariaka, he rā pānuitanga kōrero. So last week speaking about the pāhuatanga proclamation and te rao mai e that particular waiata, we thought that we would continue that particular theme tonight and focus on ngā kōrero o te parau, o te taepa, me he tahi waiata. So looking at those proclamations and then focus on 2 or 3 waiata, which 1 or 2 are well known by many, to look at those key themes, but also focusing on some of the kupu me ngā rerenga kōrero. So some of the structures within those waiata and ki kupu that we can utilise today throughout, in our daily lives. Hoi anō, ka tukuna te kōrero tuatai, he karakiatanga kōrero tēnei. Hem?
Sorry. Karakiatanga kōrero. We thought it's often good just to start off with a little karakiatanga kōrero o he kōrero poto. Hei kai mā tātou I te pōnei, whakaaro mā tātou, e tātari I aha rānei mā tātou I roto I ngā pō. So thought it would be a great idea just to kick off with something small tonight. And so we have for some of us, might be quite a well-known statement, especially the first piece, which says manawa te putanga, ariki ki te putanga tauira, the second part of which is tauira tū, tauira rongo, tauira e hai. So the way in which this particular statement is set out, it comes from another pariaka poi. And but takes its origins from a karakia, especially the first sentence. And those of us that are involved with or are familiar with karakia such as these generally starts off with manawa mai ai te putanga o te ariki, manawa mai ai te putanga o te tauira. So as you will have seen and may have heard in previous kōrero that we'd set out, the poi that have emerged from Parihaka or Taranaki in particular, generally take the form of or take parts or elements of karakia that were applied to context of the time. So this is no different case here, where we have particularly the first sentence has been drawn from an older karakia to give reference to and inspiration to the context of the time. So that's just a little bit of the context, and we thought that this would be a great great little kōrero for us to look at tonight, and a great little kōrero for those of you who do whai kōrero. Perhaps parts of this can be used in karanga as well, to perhaps use and apply in your as you uphold your own kind of responsibilities. So manawa te putanga o te ariki. How we view this, I mean, we take what we generally do is take the key concepts and themes out of statements like this. And so if we look at those, we see manawa, he putanga ariki, and he putanga tauira. Maybe you can dive into the interpretation, Jamie.
You kick off, him.
So manawa, and if we were to interpret that in some way, we generally, what does manawa mean? So we kind of put those into themes, like manawa as in determination, as in resilience, as in being steadfast, and determined. And te putanga ariki, is a pathway or a process or a methodology or an approach to give something or someone or a kaupapa prominence. Te putanga tauira. And I'd say prominence in its broadest terms. There are some particular literal translations for ariki, and those of you who want to will look at that, and ariki being he ariki. But in this context, we're trying to keep it really, really broad, because ariki can be applied to a particular person. But we've also seen ariki being applied to he kaupapa. Kaupapa has significant mana. Kaupapa nunui. Kaupapa, tino nui. So, but more generally, probably more specifically applied to people or to a person that has he mana nui, mana a whakapapa, a totone. So, and so in this context, what we're saying is that a pathway or a journey or a kaupapa that has determination, resilience, and all of those things gives prominence to people, and also becomes an exemplary or a tauira.
The example, the example for us to follow. So, I mean, I love the concept of manawa te putanga ariki ki te putanga tauira, because it affirms, reaffirms, and provides that particular pathway for us, how we might emerge to succeed, to accomplish, and as Hemi says, it's they are the examples for us. And then coming into the next line, tauira tū, tauira rongo, tauira e hai. And the wonderful thing about this and the context that Hemi provided is, tauira tū. So we've talked about tū, and we see tū in many of the karakia tanga kōrero and poi during the time of Pariaka. And often, people think about tū as being an angry man. But in this context, tū is about discipline. So tauira tū, tauira rongo. And so it reminds us of the balance that is required, in terms of being a well-rounded individual. Him?
Oh, absolutely. se tauira tū, tauira rongo, that kind of dualities, aren't they? They're the characteristics that I say leadership requires to be successful in our endeavours. So manawa te putanga, manawa mai ai te putanga. Some of you may be familiar with te putanga ariki. Ki te putanga tauira speaks to those chiefly endeavours, or those endeavours and the journeys we take that lead to prominence. Prominence as an ariki, prominence as an exemplary, applying characteristics of tū and rongo. Tauira tū, tauira rongo, tauira e hai, that become reference points and inspiration points for people as a legacy, perhaps, for people to follow. And so if we put that into context within parihaka, for me, it's quite clear that these statements were being used to inspire people to the context and the things that were significantly impacting them at the time. Yep.
Ka pai. O ie, so he tauira pai tēnā, mā koutou, hei wātanga mā koutou. Haere tonu.
So just to recap from last week, we did show the slide last week, but we've had some really great comments from everyone. So we thought, well, we'll do a quick recap while we've got the time, because it does lead into the next few slides ahead of us. And so we looked at the period that we're in, and we referenced significantly the pāhua that had happened, which is why we kind of touched on a little bit of the proclamations that were made at the time, some of this historic kōrero that we've been able to pull out for you all tonight. So ka whaia ko te hia o tērā wakaaro, ki te ahunga mai o te pāhua. He hara ngā take nui e are ana i taua wā, ko tahi mano warurau, whiti te kaumā iwa. Te tau, ka tīmata ngā mahi parau o ngā iwi roto parihaka, ka tukuna e te whiti. Ngā iwi ki te parau, he ha te take, he tohe, he tohe, he tū, ko te mana i runga i o rātau whenua. He ātete i ngā ture, i ngā kaupapa e puta ana i te kawanatanga i taua wā. So we thought that it would be good just to give a little bit, or recap on a little bit of the historical kind of context that might help us lead into the next few waiata. So we did touch on this last week, so we thought we'll do a quick recap as we lead into the next two slides. So this particular slide was what we're calling them proclamations, because that's how they're set out in some of the writings, that they're he kupu whakatauira, he kupu hopu i ngā kaupapa e haere ana i te wā. And so they're kind of like, they're set out as almost like historic statements of the time that helped our old people retain and reference historical kind of points in time, and even grievances perhaps. And we've definitely used these, haven't we, Jamie, over the course of the last few years to help guide some of the key references and grievances at the time, and guided our treaty settlement claims. So this particular statement or proclamation, it took place in 1879, and it obviously recounts some of the kōrero that Te Uiti and Tohu were setting out during that time. And so it goes, ka kōrero a Te Uiti, ka whakataka e au te hunga kaha i runga i ngā torona, ka mainga te hunga nonohi ki runga, ka mākona tia te hunga matikai ki ngā mea pai, te hunga whai taonga ia, ka hokahoki a rawa kore tia. Do you want to interpret that, Jamie? I'll do the first part. So kōrero, the first sentence basically says to whiti proclaim that I will dethrone, I will bring down, I say dethrone, I will bring down or render those, the strong, in reference to those that are sitting in the government upon the throne. I will dethrone the people that have authority over us. Ka mainga te hunga nonohi ki runga, and I will place those high up. I will place those upon them, the thrones. ka whakamākina tia te hunga matakai. I will give sustenance of those that are hungry, with those things good. Ka te hunga whai tāonga ia ka whakahukia rawa kore, and I will render those, the wealthy, poor. So it's quite a strong statement in reference to the fact that Te Whiti sought to bring some equilibrium and balance to the fact that the government were applying punitive and legislative and even military measures across the land, and tried to set some balance in the way that he would bring those that were affected by military, almost military rule at the time, bring some balance and bring the people, give access to those that were oppressed to things that would help sustain them in their communities.
Yeah, so the context here, he kupu whakahau he tēnei. And so if you can imagine, e whakahau ana, kei te kōrero a te uti ki te iwi. And so, sort of inspiring people, giving them the courage and that conviction to go out and plough the land. And, ultimately what, through that action, when they talk about dethroning those and, raising up the meek and nourishing those that have been, nourishing those that are famished or poor, it was that sort of instruction to go out and do the work so that they can get to a place to uplift the circumstances that they found themselves in. Ultimately, that desire, ka torona te wenua, ka torona te tangata, haerere notia te wenua, nōku te wenua ko te parau tēnei. And so this is that, that the land, the people shall sort of go forth to secure again the land because it is my land. And, a lot of the narratives at the time, when Te Whiti sent our taueke out, they were ploughing their land. And, ka parau a Taranaki a Ngāti Ruanui a te atiawa, ka mau katoa ki te ere. And I think it's, people always say, where's Ngāti Tama Mutunga? And, at this time, there were basically the three sort of confederations, if you like. There was Te Atiawa was all inclusive of Te Atiawa Nui Tonu. Ngāti Ruanui was basically, the south, and of course Taranaki iwi in the middle. And we know what happened as a consequence of the ploughing campaigns in terms of ka mau ho tātou mātua, ho tātou tupuna ki roto I te ware ere. But I think, this kupu wakarite is a key piece for me, ko te rānga ka awai, he parau I te wenua. And so those of us that, and I know there's probably a few online, the whānau that, when the ka awai is running on the Waitara, the mouth of the Waitara River, or if we see a shoal of kahawai, and, it's pretty active, right? It glistens and you can hear it, you can see it. And so they are likened, our tupuna who went out to plough, like that of a rānga kaawai. So they were many, and they were very active. And the kaawai hem, it's quite a strong fish too, right?
Yep. There's also a likeness to the way in which the ploughing turned over land when you look at the shoal of the kahawai and how it creates that rippled effect on the land as well. So there are quite a few symbolic meanings for the way in which they were moving as shoals to plough the land, and then there's the physical application of ploughing the land, and what that looked like was very, very similar to the way in which the kahawai moves and creates this ripple effect across the land, the same way in which the plough does when it ploughs the land. Yeah. So beautiful, beautiful imagery in my mind.
Yeah. Ka pai.
There's another piece there, maybe we haven't spoken about in the past, Jamie, where, there's a beautiful kōrero about when the old people were taken, in particular Matakate, who was one who was nearly 80 years old when he was taken prisoner. Mm. And there's accounts in charge books and other kind of Pākehā references where they said, we've got this old man by the way of Matakate that has been taken in And what do we do? And because he was such a prominent leader of the time, those in leadership, Pākehā leadership, were quite perplexed because they had this old, very old man, Matakate, who was leading a group of ploughmen. And what actually happened was the parliamentarians of the time wanted to raise money so that they could pay for the sureties or pay for the bail that was expected of the prisoners at the time so that they could get Matakate out. And then there's the kōrero about other parliamentarians whose sons were caught up in the ploughing campaigns and wanted to pay some form of surety or bail to get his son out at the same time as Matakate. And what did he say? He said, e kore au we, ki te hara mai au, me hara mai aku tamariki. So the other part to this proclamation is Te Witi saying, e hara mā te moni koutou e hoki mai, kei runga taku ringa e pehi ana. Which is, it's a beautiful, beautiful kōrero where the government's trying to pay for certain individuals to be released from custody because they were perceived to be either great leaders or ariki, and definitely tauira in the case of Matakate, but to leverage their position to try and get individuals out. And Te Witi said, and more Matakate said, e kore au wehe. So if I come, you're bringing my children with me as well. And and Te Witi saying, e kore, e hara mā te moni aku here here e wehe mai, kei runga taku ringa e pehi ana. And in that case, he's saying, the moral or the convictions that my people have to this kaupapa are such that they won't leave.
Yeah, mā reira e puta rātou ki te ora, ni?
Ai.
O, me haere tonu?
Ai.
Wa anei anō he kōrero, ko te pānuitanga kōrero tēnei mo te taiapa. And so, as we had, ko te tau o te taiapa, ko te tau o te pāhua, ko te tau o te parau, ko te tau o te taiapa tēnei. And again, another proclamation that gives really good context to what was happening at that time. And of course, the purpose of the fences. So anei, ka mai a ngā witi te parapara I pungareu, I taua wā kei te no ia a pungareu e te oia. Ka mai a te rori mai pungareu ki te parapara ko ngā Māori kei te tūtaki I te taiapa. Ko ngā Pākehā kei te wā ia te taiapa. Ka mau ngā tāngata ki te ere ko te taiapa tēnei. And so kua marama, so that's sort of setting the scene in the context in terms of te parapara being an area very close to pungareu. And of course, at that time, at Pungarehu were stationed Crown troops, Crown forces, ka mahi a te rori, and of course the road at that particular time was being built as well during that period. And ko ngā Māori kei te tūtaki I te taiapa. So kua marama ki tēnā, when they say ko ngā
the road was being blocked by fences. I think there was a big argument between the leadership at the time because the key reason for the occupation, the military occupation, was to support the road building through the region. And so there became a conflict or an argument ensued about where the fences should lie, whether or not fences should go across the road or fences should go in parallel with the road. And I think what the Pākehā wanted was that Māori would fence their own crops because the roads had gone straight through the middle.
Yeah.
And the Pākehā was saying, well, you need to fence. If you want the road, I can't remember whether or not it was across the road or down the road. Anyway, that kind of gives rise to the fact that Pākehā were building a fence right across the road. I think they were building a fence right across the road where the cattle stop so that the stock couldn't get into the crops. And so the Pākehā were kei te tūtaki ngā Māori I te rori ki te taiapa. So I think Māori were blocking the road with the taiapa, and so the Pākehā ka wāhia te hoia, e te Pākehā, te taiapa, e aukati ana I te rori, no te mea kei te eke mai ngā kau, I roto I te māra. And so, consequently, our people got taken to prison. And that's not funny, but...
Well, that's the context, right? And then, ka puta anō te kōrero a te uti. Ka tukunu tonu te a te uti rau ko tohu ki te taiapa, hei hopu mā te Pākehā. And as we discussed, and similar to the ploughman, they released the fences, which they were known as at that time. And then ka kōrero a te uti, ko taku wakarite waka wā tēnei mo aku ere ere. Aere koutou, ua kina ngā tatau o ngā ware ere ere, kore pau ngā pāu iha raira ki te māua te taiwa, ka re tupu, ki te tupu ka re māua. And so I guess, so the context is this. Te whiti basically said, this is the day of reckoning, right? Reckoning. So this is the 1880 period. And he says, this our people will be tried, but he says, haere koutou, hua kina ngā tatau o ngā ware ere ere. Because he said, go forth and render open, the doors of the prisons, which will be flooded. And then e kore pau ngā pāu iha raira, and Hemi, ngā kōrero mo te iha raira.
Yeah, he's basically saying the kingdom of Israel will not be emptied.
Yeah.
Given that our people saw themselves as he uri no āperahama, no hākopa, no hohepa, te tamaiti rānei, te mokopuna rānei o hākopa tuku mōhio. Kore ngā pā, e pore pau ngā pā o te iha raira, he uri mātou no te iha raira.
So he's basically saying that, as one man is taken to prison, another one will step up to carry the kaupapa. And it's interesting because when you read the accounts, it gets to a point where, ko te mahi te tau eke te paake me ngā tamariki, tāne nei, I he nei mahi. And it really starts to sort of play mind games, right? So the soldiers and the policemen at that time are sending messages back to their superiors saying, we've got a frail old man and a young child. You want us to imprison them? And then hea te kōrero a te whiti Hemi, mo te kani me te...
Well, ko wareware,
Harei te mea nā...
The axe doesn't chop itself.
Harei te mea nā te toki te he.
Wehe mai ana te ringa I te toki mā te waikura e tiro tiro. If we remove the hand from the axe doesn't chop the tree down itself. And if we remove the hand from the saw doesn't saw the tree itself. It's the hand that controls that. It's the master that gives control and instruction to the tool or the implement.
So e tino kōrero tēnā en koera te koia te uti rau ko to'u ni. Because these are the whakataukitanga kōrero in the mind games, because they would say, look, you are the saw or you are the toki, and it's the hand that actually carries that out. So tino kōrero tēnā I roto I he rārā.
And ki te māua te taiwa, ka re tupu. Ki te tupu, ka re māua. Basically saying if the potato is cooked, it will never grow. But if it's grown, it will never be cooked. And we've seen references of this particular kōrero in the context of the scale and the impact of armed occupation, yeah. So if we say ki te māua te taiwa ka re tupu, if we are overcome, ki te māua te taiwa ka re tupu, we will never grow.
Because kua māua ni, so the potato has no ability to sprout new shoots.
Yeah. Ki te tupu e kore māua. So if we are committed to growth, we will never be overcome.
So
nui ngā kōrero mo tēnā, nui ngā whakamārama mo tēnā whakataukitanga kōrero mā te wāpea I ruku ki tērā, o te hounutanga o tērā kōrero. But that's
that's got, and kua kōrero tia te rātu mo te kānga ka noho ki te wata, engari, taua ki te wenua, ka tupu he rau he mono. So again, it's that sort of, we know what happens when you've got a cooked potato, you become noa, but also when the potato's been cooked, there's no ability for it to provide new growth. And so,
yes, that is not exactly, but very similar to that whakataiki we did a few weeks back. Yeah, me ka iri te kānga ki te whata ma te huhu e kai or something like that.
Yeah. So I think the key thing here is, right, so Te Whiti, quite clear in the conviction, government, you can continue to imprison our people, but as one goes to prison, another one will stand and carry forward the kaupapa. And they, as they have done with a lot of the kupu kōrero, whakataukitanga kōrero of that time, sort of taken, te pāo iha raira, and of course, the characteristics of that kāinga, and of course, those people. And as Hemi has said, we're likening our people to Hākopa, Aprehama, and also Hohepa, which you see in the waiata. And basically, ki tō māo te taiwa kāre tupu ki te tupu kāre māo. So that's the instruction. Kia kaharai teiwi. Kia kaharai teiwi. And then I think when we look at the waiata, we see how that instruction comes to life.
Yeah, they were taken in groups of 4, I think. My recollection is they were taken in groups of 4. And then as those 4 were taken, they'd send out another group of 4 the next day after, right up until the last point where they sent out like a group of over 50. And so that created a little bit of a problem for the armed constabulary at the time, because they thought, we've just had 4 to deal with before that. Now we've got a huge group. And so they all got rounded up and taken to New Plymouth. And then, of course, straight down south. Haere tika atu ki te tonga. Ka pai kua rahi pia tērā.
Ana, haere tonu.
So of course, that's the context, yeah. That's the context. And interestingly enough, part of that proclamation in the previous slide, we've since heard recordings of Hamu Kātene almost recount that word for word, especially that first part, as a precursor or pre-context or a preface to him singing this song, Jamie?
Koia.
So it was great. It's great to hear the old people saying and recounting those as a proclamation. And then he sang this, ka kia he pāo.
Yeah, he pāo tēnei. And so I think, it's just really important, the context. So you mean te piukara, many people sort of say it's linked to te pāuatanga, but actually, as you see in the kupu and in that pānuitanga kōrero, te piukara, this particular waiata is directly related to the time of the fencing. And when you see that proclamation and what we've just discussed, ka marama hiaha te ia o tēnei waiata.
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely linked to the time of the fencing campaigns. But kei reira no ona herenga ki te pāhua nei, but directly references Pungarehu and the time which the UN occupation was held during the time of the road building.
Koia.
So if we dive into the interpret, e piki mai Pungarehu, we always, not we always, but you can really see in the way in which these waiata are structured, it's kind of almost recounting the journey of one that has been taken prisoner during that time, yeah. Because there's statements of assertion of mana, there's recollections of being taken, obviously, to Pungarehu, and there's some really heartfelt statements about, the impact of being taken as a prisoner.
But what I love, e piki mai pungareu. So we saw pungareu referenced in the proclamation, because at that particular time you had the constabulary present, ka tangi mai te piukara. And so, tērā kōrero, you know, the piukara becomes a symbol of not only the soldiers, the constabulary, but also a symbol of the confiscation of that heart, you know, that oppression that was taking place. He tohu riro ngā ngonga.
Yeah, and he tohu riro, you know, is a symbol of loss. And I've heard people talk about ngā ngonga as ko te wāhi pupuhi nei te piukara. Te tohu riro ngā ngonga o te piukara. E rere te maunawa, e mau nei te naue, e mau nei te mamae. Timata nei te rere o te mamae e rā wā. Nō reira ka he piki tia tēnei, e hangaia nei e te mauhere i tōna here tanga i te inua. Ka ara ina e te hoia ki pungareu. Ka piki i te puke, ka rongo i te piukara e tangi ana. Ana e tohu ana i te rironga i te inua, te rironga o te tangata. E rere nei te mamae ki te iwi i roto i ngā tau.
Tēnei mamae nui, te ngonga, you know, he ahua ori te ki te kurukurunga, te patunga o te iwi. He taiapa tike, te taiapa i ngā tūpui, kua mārama tēnā.
Ko te wā, ko te taiapa hoki, he ara i te mea ko te taiapa tike o te hoe, kai runga i te puke, he taiapa tike. I te tūpuhi, he taiapa pikonga, nā wai te taiapa, nā te kawana, e rere nei te mamae, e rere nei te mau i ngā nawe, e rere nei te kino e rāwā.
So kuia, ko te taiapa he tohu anō, o ngā taimahatanga o te uauatanga o tēnei mea, te rironga o te uenua, te rironga o te mana o te iwi. And then tui mai o tāua nei ringaringa. Mārama tēnā, kua tuia ngā ringaringa o ngā paake. So symbolizing again, there it is. Their hands have been bound together. They're not binding their hands together for fun. They've been, you know, forced to, you know, handcuffed. He tohu riro ngā ngonga. So again, you know, that sort of binding of their hands together is yet another symbol of oppression, of loss.
And of course, the last verses. This is one of my favorite verses, you know, when we're having very, very, very strong assertions. Piko mai e kawana, ua hau tō ariki. They bowed to me, governor. I am your superior. Ko hau tō ariki. Ko koe taku pononga, and you are my slave. E te kuini. Hei maunawa. It's a beautiful verse of assertion, of mana, of authority, that although I am taken prisoner, you are beneath me.
Actually, kei te hoki aku mahara Hemi te wā tuatahi tai mai ai Bill English, ai premier mo te motu nei i Waitangi. Me tea mai ngā mea o te taitokerau kia tuau ki te mihi mo te motu, i te taho ngā mea o te taitokerau. Ana i tai mai tō tātou tau ki te tūruro i te taho o te premier. And so we were in Waitangi, one of the iwi chairs some years ago. It was the first time Bill English had been at Waitangi as the Prime Minister. And ka mutu taku kōrero ka waiata mātou ngā mea o Taranaki te waiata nei te piukara. And that last statement, ka mea tuau kia te ururo, kua rongo mai rā koe ngā kupu o te waiata nei. Me te atu ki tō oa, kia Bill English, me he mea e tika ana te kōrero nei, piko mai e kāwana ko au tō ariki, ko koe taku pononga. pātai hia atu mehe mea pono ana te kōrero nei, ko te kōrero a te uti rawa koto. But I think it's beautiful, right? And that's, you see within a lot of the kōrero, the waiata of tohu and te whiti, they were constantly challenging and asserting, their mana, their authority.
I've just realised we've missed out a line, Jamie, from that from the song. E tui atu tui mai o taua nei ringa I te roa rori
Kuini, yeah.
kuini tiriti kei maunawa. I te roa riki ki kuini tiriti kei maunawa.
Yeah, so just, and that's important again. When they were bound, it just references the fact that they were taken down Queen Street in New Plymouth, of course, to the jail. Ka whakatikai e māu ko Hemi ngā kupu o te waiata nei. We were just wanting to make sure those of you that are familiar with the waiata were picking it up. Hadn't seen anyone in the comments yet. So engari he pai tēnei ne, I think just another example of the imagery and the style of composition of our mātua.
Yeah. So that journey, tui atu tui mai o taua nei ringa I te roa rori ki kuini tiriti, the long path up Queen Street, which we all know, if those of us in New Plymouth, if we know Queen Street, kind of had a direct line of sight to jail. And so understanding a little bit of the historical context is really important, whereby the old people that were involved in the fencing campaigns were sent from the pā down towards, those of you that know where Te Parapara is, it's on the corner of Parihaka Road, Main Road and Parihaka Road. If you turn left and go up the road, it's on that left-hand side there, that broader kind of space in there. It's just in the back there, kind of was generally what I've seen anyway, and what I understand was that area called Te Parapara. So there were large-scale plantations of wheat and through there. And so they were taken from there, or that area, and they were taken directly to Pungarehu for some time until they awaited instructions from town. And then they would ship groups of people, and maybe groups of 4 or 8, directly into New Plymouth, up Queen Street, and directly to jail as they awaited. I think they had legislation at that time to try them, but they were definitely taken from Pungarehu directly up Queen Street to the jail. And a lot of them just went straight onto the ship. Believe it was Hemi and shipped straight down south. And there were I think there were 4 different jails, one in Littleton, and that's Christchurch, and Dunedin, and Hokitika. And Ripapa was another island. So there's just 4, Littleton, Ripapa Island, Dunedin, and Hokitika. Yeah, and so it's important to understand that, the context around Queen Street, around the context around Pungarehu, and the fact that they were placed there for some time. And of course, it helps us interpret, understand the waiata a little better.
Kei konei te pātai a Puna, like when you think about Puna's pātai around how did they maintain such discipline under such pressure? And when I reflect on it, and when you start to understand, the various poi, the kupu kōrero, the pānuitanga kōrero, the thing they had was faith. Faith and belief.
Conviction.
And so when you've got faith, belief, and you have strong conviction, that's why, when I think about all of him, this concept, this term of manawa nui, and, it's, I think, we probably don't appreciate the depth of that particular concept, right? And that, tēnei mea te manawa nui. And I guess, Puna just reflecting on that little karakiatanga kōrero, putunga ki te arike, putunga ki te tauira tū, tauira rongo, tauira e hai. That particular kōrero actually speaks about discipline. It speaks about having conviction and that strength to emerge and to succeed. And in order to do that, you have to have self-belief individually, but more importantly, that collective belief and kotahitanga. And I always think about how might we capture, how might we of this generation capture that same sort of spirit, inspiration, strength, discipline, kotahitanga.
Yeah, there's faith in something higher than yourself, yeah?
Yeah.
Because you're giving of yourself, you're sacrificing of yourself, and that requires a level of faith and conviction that is something that us just don't really.
Ko he pūaroha, ne? He pūaroha ki te kaupapa me te ora o te iwi. And I think, when we think about the concept aroha, I mean, it's not airy-fairy love, kei te aroha ki te ora, ki te iwi. Because you've got to have, you've got to find something within to have that level of conviction.
Yeah.
Haere tonu, we've got another waiata, eh?
Yeah, next waiata.
Well, tēnei waiata, e re rā ngā mai. And so, we've looked at te piukara, and tērā pia, ka kite koe e tahi o ngā kupu, kei te wai aere tēnei waiata, I ngā mahi a ngā mātua I tērā wā. So another waiata. Interestingly, this him, there's a copy of this waiata in Rongo Maida's papers that Uncle Ted had, Uncle Ted Tamati. And of course, there are also examples of this waiata being sung by Koromoi Warepauri, and it's in a number of the other writings of our tupuna. And e re rā ngā mai. And when you think about kia rere tau tika ai ki te tonga, but e re rā ngā mai a te wānau, nice simple statement. The actions of our community are gathering momentum. So when you put this in the context of Te Whiti saying, ko koutou, that the our ploughmen, our fencers, ka whakawāngia, mō ngā he o te kāwanatanga, again, they're going out with strong conviction. Kia rere tau tika ai ki te tonga. So they're continuing to follow the instructions of Te Whiti. And of course, they're being taken directly to the South Island. Most weren't trialled. Tō pikitanga kei te traina. So they were immediately loaded onto the trains. Tō eketanga kei te tei ana. And then, of course, coming off the station, kia tomo kia ngā ware kiingi. Kia tomo kia ngā ware kāwana. Kia waka kinongia mō tōna ingoa. And so when we think about ngā ware kiingi, symbolizing the crown, ngā ware kāwana, symbolizing the state and all of its machinations, in terms of the institutions of the state. Kia waka kinongia mō tōna ingoa.
Of Pariaka.
Slandered in the name of Pariaka. So the context here, right? I mean, the everything relating to our tupuna around the ploughing and the fencing was very public, and there was huge amount of attention on what was happening. And part of the strategy of Te Whiti and Tohu was to continue to sort of make this very public. And there's a lot of other pānuitanga kōrero from Tohu and Te Whiti at the same time, referencing what was going on with the ploughmen and the fences. But probably one of the lovely parts of this particular waiata for me is e hara tātou he manukura aere. And so when we think about tēnei mea te manukura, ko kōrero tia tēnei mea te kura, tēnei mea te manu, So mehe manu kura koe, you know, you are, you know, you have particular status, but in this context, it's speaking about freedom. E hara tātou he manu kura aere, which I love because it's not saying, you know, he mauhere tātou. It's going the opposite, saying e hara tātou he manu kura haere, basically saying that they were not able to freely move about with the mana or the dignity, the tapu of their birthright.
Yeah. By being taken into prison. Yeah.
Prison. Yeah. So him waiho te wakamaki tōna kaupapa.
Yeah, which, as Jamie said, the leaders at Pariaka of the time sought to make it quite a public thing so that the legacy that the government of the time would be one of shame. And I mean, it kind of carries that to this day, yeah.
So koera te legacy, ne? Yeah, koera.
The legacy that the government or the governor of the time would be one of shame. And I think that's, you know, that hasn't changed because ka rere te wairua ka tawhiti ki tauiti oti atu. Because in our hearts and minds, we will not be constrained. Yeah.
Yeah. Ahakua kua herea te tinana engari anō.
Ko te wairua.
Yeah.
Ia hākua te tinana kua mau ere tia ko te wairua ka rere ki tauiti oti atu. Ko te kaupapa o Pariaka, te wairua o Pariaka kei te rere ki tauiti oti atu. Ko ngā kupu, ko ngā kōrero, ko ngā manu.
Ki tū atu i ngā kaupapa kiko, ne?
Right.
And I guess it's another beautiful kōrero, really. I sort of reflecting on that now, Hemi, you know. Ka rere te wairua ki tauiti oti atu. Aha, ki tauiti. That's another one of those kōrero that you can use.
Yeah. Yeah. Ki mai nei te kāwana kuia taku ariki. It's been said that the governor is my ariki. Yeah, nah. The governor says he's my lord. The governor says he's my lord, or it's been said that the governor is my lord. But not in my mind. E kore ia, e tua ngā here atu a ruaumoko. So this statement basically says the governor says, or it's been said that the governor is my lord, but not in my mind, and nor by detainment. Yeah? E kore iau, e tua i ngā here atu e ruaumoko. Nor by detainment, not in my mind, neither by detainment or other things.
Yeah.
Ne?
Oh, yeah.
E tua iau ngā here atu e ruau. Being detained being, ko te kōrero ki a ruaumoko, I herea te tangata I roto I te whare toka. Ne?
Koera te kupu wakarite mo aua ware ere ra stone houses, ne?
Ko te mana ka purutia kia au kia aita. Pēnei ngā toka au raumoko. So some pretty,
yeah.
Some very, very, very beautiful statements there, I think, and it speaks to the determination, the power and faith and commitment that that the old people had during that time.
And this concept e ruau moko purutia kia au kia I te aha I te mautonu, back, you know, that sort of land league in the inner, you see that same sort of taki
Right.
during the time of the confiscation and land loss with Waikato, a very similar taki kōrero like that. But I love that because it's, you know, it just reminds us to hold firm, to stay resolute, be resolute, and unwavering, resolute and unwavering, you know, that sort of concept. And when you think about the context of this waiata, that you're being loaded on a boat, and that you no longer have your freedoms, and that you're becoming a martyr. Yeah, your rights have been taken away from you because our whānau, they weren't trialled. And then, you know, waiho te wakamā. So, you know, they were thinking, waiho te wakamā ki tōna kaupapa, that ultimately ka wakātia te kāwanatanga I hāna mahi. Because people would see how wrong it was.
Yep. And that wakatia, the legacy and the wakama that would be on the government and the government of the time would be beyond our lifetime. So that they were, they saw themselves as, well, is it martyr the right word?
Yeah.
The point at which the legacy of shame will be forever.
Yeah.
And the, you know, it's interesting to note too, Jamie, that government passed legislation that required them, well, not required, that gave them the power not to hold people trial. So, kuira te tikanga o te kia rere tautika ki te toa. So, ka haere ki kuini tiriti, haere ki te whare toka o te whare here here. Tāina ki runga I te poti, te kaipuke, rere tautika ki te tonga without trial because the legislation that they had passed at that time, they didn't need it.
Koia.
Ka pai.
He taui rā no tēnei ne, so kei reira no hoki he tahi kupu.
He manukura.
He manukura. He manukura haere tātou. I don't know whether, ki te au I tahi pōneke nei, ka reitu mohi o mehe mea, he mahi a te manukura tēnā, engari, hei.
Ka pai. Te ahua nei, ko pau te wā ki a tāua.
Ana. O mau mihi ana ki a tātou te iwi, mihi ana ki a tātou, koutou, ko piri mai, ko tata mai ki tēnei pai kōrero. Ko te tumana ko ia a te rā wiki, ko oki mai. Tō tātou ua a te poihi, hei arahi a māua ko Hemi, ki henei kātū mai. Hoiti anō rā, mihi ana ki ngā kupu, ki ngā waiata, ki koutou ana oki, ana ka tukunatu rā ki a koe e mau e Whakakapi tō tātou pai kōrero I te pōnei.
Ka pai, kia whakakapi ake pia ki te rā kupu I te timatanga ne. Hoi anō mihi ana, whai ana te ia o ngā mei ki tiemi kia koutou, whakarongo mai ana. Me te mea, e hari te mea ko enei kōrero te mutunga mai o te tika I te ahara nei. He kōrero enei mā koutou e ruku, mā koutou e tātari, mā koutou e wāwā. Kia ki te ai he maramatanga mō koutou. Koira te tumuna ko ia māua kia kau e noho rā enei kōrero. Hei kōrero toka, kei roto I a koutou. Ruku hia, ranga hau hia. Kia ki te ai he maramatanga mā koutou. Hoi no, I runga I tērā, kia whakakapi ake o tātou, tō tātou, kōrero I te pōnei. Manawa mai ai te putanga o te ariki, manawa mai ai te putanga o te tauira. Ka eke ki rongo rupe, ka eke ki rangita ua tēnei te watu kai au. Kei te kauanga tapu te mauri tūtu whiwhi anuku tūtu whiwhi āragi, kei te whiwhi ai wao, kei te rawe ai wao, purutia mai wao, tāhuia mai wao. Tēnei te mauri ka Whakapiki, tēnei te mauri ka Whakakaki, ko te mauri o tēnei ariki, te mauri o tēnei tauira, te mauri kai runga, te mauri e rangi ka puta kai waho, kei te wai au, kei te ao marawa. Uhi wero, tau mai te mauri ki runga ki a koutou I tēnei pō. E rongo, whakairi ia ki runga ki a Tina.
Tina.
Hui e, tai ki.
Tai ki e. Tēnā tātou.